Hello
Great.
and hello and welcome to another episode of NRE Live. I'm Derek Winkworth, aka Cloud Toad, and this is our bi-weekly live stream where we talk about network engineering and network automation. We have often have guests on the show, and today we have Stephen Kiely on, who is an active member of our community. He's made a number of contributions already, and so without further ado, we'll get started. Actually, um, so why don't we're gonna do I guess a standard start here, Stephen. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into networking?
Sure. So I started about 10 years, 10, 12 years ago in desktop support, working with desktops, printers, moved into server support, and took an interest in networking. So I applied for a networking class and to get my CCNA at a local community college. When doing the CCNA, I was at first looking for just a way to get out of desktop support, but found that I really enjoyed network engineering. At the college that I participated in the CCNA class after earning my CCNA, they offered me a position as a lab instructor on their Saturday labs to help students to go through their CCNA labs and help them to get their CCNA.
Nice.
After working, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, nice. That's kind of an endorsement, right? Come back and help us run our labs.
Yes. So after working with a community college for a few months, I applied and got a position as a senior network engineer in a local communications company. In working as a senior networking engineer in provisioning, I had to apply provisioning to what we call NIDs. They're like switches that we install at customer locations. I noticed that there was a config that we were commonly placing on them to connect them to TACX, and we had to do make some settings changes on the NID as well as some changes on a website that we used internally. So I looked into how do I automate that task because it was taking up 15 minutes of my time every single NID I connected to, which added up to hours of my day. And with 10 others doing that, 10 hours a day that was unnecessary. So I started looking at that's when I started looking at Python and we use secure CRT as a remote um, CLI.
Sure.
In Secure CRT, they have the option to use Python for programming or for automation, or using VBS. Their Python libraries, though, were hindered as you could not open a port or um, anything that had to do with ports was unusable. So I could not open up a connection to a website or open up a connection to anything outside of just the CLI within Secure CRT. So I moved my scripts into VBS as I could open up Internet Explorer automatically using VB script and then control the web browser to make the website changes. That worked for a while, but I noticed that my VB Visual or VBS code was getting too complicated. And about that time, I found the NetMiko Python library by Kurt Byers.
Yeah, it's a great library. We use that in our project.
Yes, it is. So I converted my 15,000 line VB script into about a 1,500 line Python project. and then found a way to add a desktop UI onto it and deployed it to the rest of my team.
Nice.
Yep.
S-
So after deploying that, the IT department took notice on it and offered me a position as a systems engineer to help automate the rest of our network. And that's where I'm at,
Doing network automation.
doing network automation. Yep.
Nice. Do you do most of your work in Python?
Most of my work is in Python. We're using um, it's a closed source software that's built upon open source, which is kind of funny. Um, but there's some Python code in it, as well as the pieces that talk to the network equipment uses more Jinja JSON files, something called HOCON, human readable, kind of like JSON, but it's human readable, and Tosca files, which is mainly used by, I lost it, like web automation, not
Sure.
web automation. Sure, good.
Yeah, I don't know that much about Tosca, but I thought it for some reason in my head I had it that it was related to NFV.
Cloud.
Yeah.
Yep, NFV and cloud. Yes.
Hmm. And so I mean, you sort of have a tool set. You have some you chose a chosen data representation. This whole which sounds interesting. I've never heard of that. That's something I'm going to Google immediately after this call, actually. Um,
Sure.
so why Hokan though? Why is it because it's I didn't think JSON was. I guess it is unreadable, right? When you dump a JSON blob, it is pretty unreadable, I guess, unless you have some kind of pretty printer.
Correct. And that's, I believe, the main reason why. The Hocon was not my choice, but it's the choice of the company that wrote the software that we're using for network automation.
Okay.
My preference is JSON because I can serialize and deserialize it in Python natively as dictionaries and key value pairs.
Hmm.
Just dictionaries, yeah.
So this is you had an interesting progression when you were talking about your career. You started off desktop and then you sort of went to server support, and I'm
Yes.
guessing it was primarily Windows, but it sounds like you might have actually done some other kind of servers as well.
Sure. I worked with Linux as well.
So you're not you it's not the first time you've seen some like a bash script or something like that.
No, not the first time.
Hmm.
So that's what I started. I guess my automation started in bash scripts and writing Windows shell batch
PowerShell.
PowerShell scripts in my desktop support slash server support job. And then, so I was already automation minded when I moved to network engineering, which to be automation minded to me means just to be willing to think of a way to take something that's manually done and make it automated automated and to start willing to start small and to grow it as demand increases.
Nice. Yeah, that's the right way to do it. Um, this is a very measured approach. So you've have you particip or contributed back to many open source projects, or is this is NRELabs like one of the first, or like how would you?
Sure. So NetMiko was the first library that I created a PR with. Um, as I mentioned, we use part of my automation was connecting to our NIDs, and our NIDs did not have support for NetMiko. They're written similar to the Cisco SSH, but had some minor changes I had to adjust for when working with NetMiko. So Kirk accepted the PR with some minor changes, and that's how I got our NIDs added in support.
Nice. So for people who are watching, if you're wondering what a NID is, it's a network interface device. I'm guessing that's what it is. So you must work for
Correct.
a service provider?
A service provider. That's correct.
Yeah, because you wouldn't our NIDs, right? Unless you work for that's who deploys a NID. It's a NIDs can be very simple actually. Some of them are literally just it's a beige box in a wall that does wiring, but they can be and it would terminate like uh, a CSU or like uh, long range Ethernet or something like that. But they can be more complicated. They can actually be devices that you can log into and configure. And it sounds like
Correct.
that's what you're doing at your shop.
Correct. I don't want to give away too much, but we can provision VLANs on that take the customer traffic, whether it's tagged or untagged, apply the service provider VLAN on it, apply the policing and shaping and any other customizations before it gets sent off to our network.
Nice. Yeah. So working at a service provider is I worked at Verizon for a little while, and I I really enjoyed it because I started off as a software engineer and then became a network engineer. And I've always, I've been very fond. I've been through several iterations of languages like Perl and Tickle that were all big at one point for doing automation.
Yes.
And of course, working as a service provider, they highly encourage that kind of thinking. And that was, I'm sure. So, with your background doing server administration and working at a service provider, that sounds like that's like prime. That's a perfect background for getting involved in network automation.
Correct. Yes.
Um, so, you have made some contributions to NRELabs. Can you tell us a little bit what it's like to well, first of all, what have you contributed, and second, what is that experience like when you want to contribute something? You know what do you have to do? Like, what are the steps you got to go through?
Sure. So I'm a Windows user. My work only allows Windows. So I had to find a way to run NRELabs, which at the time that it was posted, when I was looking into contributing a lesson, which I still have yet to do done. But when I first started in the contributing guide, it mentioned as a Windows user, um, it should work because Minikube supports Windows, but we don't have any instructions on how to do it.
Yep.
So this was about a year ago, I believe, and I converted the shell script, um, which at the time was a very basic shell script to start the Minikube service, and I rewrote it in a batch file, Windows, which is an alternative to a shell script that would run the Minikube. Then I took my work got busy. I submitted that as a PR. Work got busy, and I came back to NRELabs a month or two ago and found that my Windows script no longer worked.
Okay. Yeah, that happens sometimes.
Yep. Yep. So in the original submission, um, the first thing that I do is look for a contributing guide, which NRE Labs has lots of guides on how to submit either lesson content or content for the server itself or syringe. So I read through the contributing guide and then I did a fork on GitHub, which allowed me to have a instance of in this case, antidote in my Git repository. Then I created a branch, which was adding Windows support, and made my changes locally there. And then in GitHub, there's an option to allow you to, once you make commits to a branch, it allows you the option to submit a pull request.
and then of course it gets reviewed. There's feedback. Um,
Yes,
you make some corrections, and then eventually it gets merged.
correct. Hopefully, and that's the idea.
Nice. The Yeah, that Windows support is a big deal. I don't actually have a Windows PC anymore. That's not true. I have one, but I just never use it. It's
Yeah,
it's cumbersome for me to set up. So we do everything in Linux. So this was very much needed, and thank you very much for contributing that. I know that there's
you're
quite
welcome.
it's used actually by a number of people who are sort of waiting for that to happen. So
Yep. So coming back a couple of months ago, I noticed the way that Minikube was run, how Antidote was split off into different sections where you have NRELabs curriculum, then Antidote Web, Syringe, separate, and the platform Antidote, or forgetting the name, but
it's
what runs it
self-medicate.
locally. Yeah, self-medicate.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I noticed there was many changes in the self-medicate script. I first started to implement those back into my batch file, but found issues every step of the way. I had been interested in a Windows subsystem for Linux, and on the NRELabs documentation, it mentioned possibly using Windows subsystem for Linux to support running self-medicate locally, but ran into issues there, mainly due to the Minikube in Windows Subsystem for Linux cannot create. It can make changes to an existing running Minikube, but cannot create a Minikube.
Hmm.
Cannot run Minikube start, which is rather problematic.
Yeah, that's strange.
Yes. So then I started exploring, okay, how can I run Minikube, the Windows version of Minikube, through Windows Subsystem for Linux? That way I can use the same shell. And then found a, a good document, but I would have to replace over half of the self-medicate script to make the Windows references, copy the SSH keys to the right locations. Became too complex. Maybe not complex is the right word, but too many manual steps. And that's when I started looking into Vagrant and running Minikube through a Vagrant file. Thankfully, at the same time that I was looking into providing a Vagrant file, Meriden was testing running Minikube without a VM using the VM driver none. And with some of his changes to the self-medicate when running VM driver none, I was able to implement that into the Vagrant file. So now we can provide the Vagrant file to Windows users.
Nice. And that's probably the right way to go since it's portable, right?
Correct.
Ultimately, it'll be portable. Uh, so yeah, that's awesome. Actually, the Vagrant file is really nice, and it was done very well. Like it's well formed. Like you can read it and understand what it's doing. I mean, it was done very well, and that sort of brings to mind like you there's it's possible it's good obviously to contribute to an open source community, but there's there's a the right way, or I should say maybe an effective way to do that, and there's like less effective ways to do that without passing judgment, we'll say, or
Sure.
trying not to pass judgment. So what kind of things did you learn in order to be an effective contributor, or um, yeah, well, we'll just leave it at that. Like, I mean, I've seen contributions in projects. I've been guilty of this myself, where I don't know what I was thinking when I opened that PR. It wasn't very clean. It wasn't very clear what I was doing, etc. So, what, what sort of things did you learn? What are some things you like to do when you're making a contribution that that you think is an effective way to do it?
Sure. So the first thing that I do is I look at the closed PRs on a project to see what the maintainers like to see. So I look at any change requests that they make, any comments they make on, is it a certain formatting or style that I need to maintain? Is there ways that they prefer the code written? Um, where as main, I believe, sorry, maintainers can be picky to what they will accept or reject on a PR. So looking at the past acceptance and rejects can kind of tell you what you might need to submit or how you might need to submit that PR.
That is a great piece of advice, actually. Open the closed PRs that were accepted, and look at the comments from the maintainers. That's a great piece of advice, actually.
Thank
Um,
you.
we should put that in the docs. um,
So I also like to look at the ones that were not accepted and why they were not accepted.
yeah, that makes sense, right? You don't want to repeat history.
Correct.
Um, I'm looking at a list of questions. What can open source projects do to make it easier for people to contribute? Like you can be as effective as you want to be, but sometimes it's the project itself does not make it easy. So what are sort of obstacles that the people that people involved with the project can remove to make it easier for new people to contribute?
Sure. So transparency is the biggest, in my opinion. So being transparent about, which I believe NRELabs is doing, but being transparent about the process, being transparent about the issues. Um, I see many issues opened by Meriden that he posts on whenever he has an idea of something to implement in future. So instead of keeping those ideas on a to-do list outside of GitHub, it's great to have an issue opened on them. So that way, when I browse to see what issues I can take a look at, take a gander at, I may find one that I would be able to work on. Tagging those issues with complexity also helps. If I'm a beginner, I'm going to look for something that's complexity low. I'm not going to go for a complexity high and try to knock it out. Um, so having labels that help a beginner or an intermediate person find the issues that they can contribute to.
Yeah, and I think we try to do that in our project. We like to tag things. I don't think we always tag things, but I know that we have put complexity tags on some of the issues we've opened in the past. That's good hygiene anyway. Um, so I'm sorry, you said the tagging is a good way to do it. What was the other? You said there was another thing you mentioned before that.
Transparency,
Transparency. Yeah.
or yeah. So using issues or I noticed you started using the projects within GitHub or have been using projects within GitHub, but using projects, creating documents, um, and just being open with where you want to take the project.
Yeah, that helps tremendously when it's best not to if a bunch of people working on your project, it's probably good not to surprise them with drastic changes that will alter their workflow, right? With how they,
Right.
you get acclimated to how the project is run, and then you want to be as transparent as possible about things that could alter that, because it'll throw people off, and plus it's good to make sure people feel like they're involved in the process, right? And and they are, right. They need to provide feedback so you don't make like a big mistake anyway, or even you just don't make fewer mistakes. We'll say when you're transparent and you involve people and they know what's coming, and then they can help shape where it's going. That's really critically important. We have a member of our team named Lisa who is very, very adamant about this. Whenever we start having a conversation in private chat about stuff we should or shouldn't do, and she sees it, she's like, "You need to take this to GitHub so that the community can see it and and comment on
Exactly.
it." Yeah, and it's the thing is, people are a lot like electricity. They like to take the path of least resistance. So when something pops in your head, sometimes you like immediately jump on chat and you're like blah 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 blah. You start talking about it, and it doesn't, and then someone has to remind you, yeah, you probably should take this to GitHub or Discord, even some place where the community can participate in it, or the forums. Um, so there's another question here. What makes a good open source citizen? So I actually this was a question that was on there before we started. There's a number of questions that have magically appeared since we started this stream. But and I told you I was going to ask this, and you said, "Well, what do you mean good open? What do you mean open source citizen?" So when I say this, I mean it in the most general way. It's not just about code, right? It's there's lots of ways people can contribute to a project, documentation, and we have Overjix now doing translations for YouTube for these uh, videos and stuff that we post on YouTube. Um, so all of those people are part of the citizenry of this project, if you will, and
Sure.
just in general, you know, what I mean, this has been talked I guess about a lot, but I think we all sort of we talked about what we talked about with you, and it seems like we'd like to hear your opinion on this. What do you think makes a good open source citizen for a project?
Sure. So to me, don't be afraid to ask questions. Um, don't be afraid to raise issues, even if you think could be dumb, or there's always the saying of there's no such thing as a stupid question. So look through the closed issues, make sure you're not submitting a repeat question. There's nothing wrong with asking though. And also to not be afraid to submit PRs. You know, maybe you do write and we all have made poor pull requests. But even submitting a poor PR request, you learn. You learn through comments, suggestions from the maintainers. As a community, we can't approve PRs, but that doesn't stop me from making a comment on someone else's PR. Maybe just adding in they'd also like to see support on this, or adding suggestions or comments.
Yeah, that's being so there's a lot you can comment on, right? There's PRs,
Yes.
um, any open, like if Matt opens an issue and said, hey, I was thinking this might be an idea, and that's uh, as a user, right? If even if you don't contribute code, you can read that. If hey, as a user, I don't know if I would want that, or I would, as a user, that would be great. There's things that you can add. Those kind of comments are actually they may seem inane, but they're actually pretty helpful, because if no comment is made, then that idea exists in a vacuum, and it's it may it helps if a few people um, can oh, my video froze. It helps. We have to. We're gonna wrap up soon, anyways. But it
Sure.
helps if a few people could at least comment, and and uh, and then we have some idea. Maybe we should do this sooner rather than later, right? Or whatever. So even as a user, I guess what I'm saying is it's good to, there's ways you can still be a good open source citizen, even if you're not contributing code or what have you.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so I think we are going to call it, because my video is frozen. It's just a matter of time, maybe before everything else freezes. uh, so do you have any? Is there? So you're on Twitter. You're on. It looks like you're on our Discord server. You're on our community forum. What is your handle again?
Sure. Let me check. I believe it's SMK. Yeah, SMK 4664. I'm not on Twitter,
Oh,
but
you're
I
not.
am on Discord, the community forum, as well as GitHub.
Okay, great. So if you if you're watching the show and you want to ask Stephen a question, you can do so on any of those locations, our Discord, our community, and on GitHub. And don't forget also to follow us at NRELabs on Twitter, myself at CloudToad, Mirden at Mierdin, and thank you for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. And thank you for being on the show and for contributing, Stephen. It means a lot to us, and we hope that you stick around for the long haul.
You're welcome. And thanks for having me.
Sure. All right. Adios.